Hello, I'm Reverend Ruth Van Lillian. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Emerald Coast. We are a covenantal community founded on loving kindness and a common devotion to our free faith. We recognize all the earth as sacred ground, and we welcome each other into this virtual space. We especially welcome those visiting with us today. We are so glad you're here. We invite you to check out our website and our Facebook page to learn more about us. We hope to touch hearts, teach minds, challenge spirits, and comfort souls. May you find refreshment and restoration in our service today.
This fire is the reminder of the light within us all, the yearning for freedom, the longing for truth, the flame of intuition, the torch of conscience. We dedicate this service to the remembrance of the holy light.
Good morning, everyone. It's Amy again, and today I'm going to tell you the story of Purim. And Purim is a Jewish holiday that actually happens this week. Starts Wednesday evening and goes all day Thursday, and it's a very joyous holiday. It's not particularly seriously religious. It's according to my sources, the only story about Jewish people where God isn't mentioned at all. So it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun. I can remember when I was a kid, because you're supposed to dress up and act out the parts and have parties and do all kinds of stuff. So what I have here is a puppet theater. That's my hand. And I'm going to tell you this story, and I'm going to shorten a little bit, okay? So the first thing you need to know is that you're supposed to participate in this. If we were in person, I would be giving you all kinds of stuff and things to play with and things to do. But I'm just going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to have to depend on you making the noises for me. So in this story, these are the characters. So this is Ahasuerus, and he's the king. So every time I say Ahasuerus, you say the king. And this is Mordecai. So every time I say Mordecai, you clap, because he's a good man. Just one clap. And this is Esther, and she's so beautiful. So every time I say Esther, you say, ah. And the last character is Haman, and he's the bad guy. So every time I say Haman, you make some kind of noise, like bang, 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 or have a noisemaker to drown out his name. Okay, so we ready? So it's a long story. It has a long beginning, but I'm going to start out like you do with old stories, and you say, this story takes place in the days of Ahasuerus, who ruled over 127 countries. And it came to pass that Ahasuerus needed a new queen. So Ahasuerus sent out a call to his whole kingdom for all the beautiful young women to be brought to the capital so he could pick a new queen. There lived in Shushan, the capital, a beautiful young lady named Hadassah, or Esther. Esther was taken to the palace with all the other beautiful young women. But her cousin Mordecai, who had raised her as his own child, warned her not to tell anyone in the palace that she was Jewish, because, you know, things were problematic for Jews all throughout time. And things hadn't been going badly lately, but there was a lot of anti-Semitism around. So Esther went to the palace. And every day, Mordecai walked by the palace to make sure that Esther was doing okay. One day, he heard two servants plotting to kill Ahasuerus. Mordecai told Esther, and Esther told Ahasuerus. The story was found to be true, and the two servants were punished. And the story was written in Ahasuerus' private record book. So things were going along pretty well until Ahasuerus promoted Haman, one of his servants, to the high rank and made Haman more important than all the other royal officers. Everyone had to bow down to Haman. But Mordecai would not. Haman knew that Mordecai was Jewish. Haman decided that it would not be enough to punish Mordecai. He wanted to punish all the Jewish people. Ahasuerus let Haman make a law that all Jews should be killed on the 13th day of Adar. Then Haman sent copies of that law to all the countries that Ahasuerus ruled over. When Mordecai found out about the law, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. Then he went to Esther's palace, because by now Esther was the queen because she was so beautiful. Mordecai sent Esther a message with one of her servants explaining what was happening, and she must beg Ahasuerus to save the Jews. So Esther sent a message back to Mordecai saying that she would be killed, that if anybody went in to see Ahasuerus without being first called, they would be killed. But Mordecai sent a message back to Esther saying, do not think that you have a better chance than the rest of the Jews to escape. And maybe it was just for a time like this that you became queen. So Esther put on her most beautiful clothes and jewels and went to see Ahasuerus. Gets complicated, doesn't it? And Ahasuerus was happy to see her and pointed his scepter at her and said, everything's fine. Then Ahasuerus asked Esther what she wanted, and Esther replied that she wanted Ahasuerus and Haman to attend a party she was giving. At this party, So we have to have a party. Gets very complicated with more. So we're having a party with Ahasuerus and Haman and Esther. At this party, Esther begged Ahasuerus, please save me and my people from this wicked Haman. He wants to kill all of us. Then Ahasuerus saw how evil Haman was and ordered that he be hanged on the gallows that he had built for Mordecai. Ahasuerus also gave all Haman's property to Esther, gave his royal seal to Mordecai, and put Mordecai in charge of managing Haman's property. But there was still a problem. So any law that had once been written in the king's name and sealed with the royal ring could not be canceled. So Ahasuerus let Mordecai make a new law that allowed the Jews of every city to join together and defend themselves. After this, Ahasuerus dressed Mordecai like a king, and the Jews in Shushan became very well respected. Mordecai wrote down everything that had happened and sent letters to all the Jews in all the countries of Ahasuerus. He told them to celebrate every year on the 14th and 15th days of Adar. That was the month that had been changed for them from sorrow to gladness and from sadness to a holiday. They should celebrate as days of feasting and gladness and of sending food to their friends and gifts to the poor. The Jews promised to celebrate every year, just as Mordecai had written to them. So, what should we learn about this story? I think the most important thing that I remember is what Mordecai told Esther. Maybe it was just for a time like this that you became queen. Maybe it's for a time like this that you are where you are and you do something that, even though you're afraid to do it, you do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. So on this day, it's customary on this holiday to give food to the poor or prepare meals for the poor or for people who don't have a lot, and to eat little cookies called Haman Tashem, which means Haman's pockets. And if we were all together in person, I would bring you some Haman Tashem, but maybe next year we can do that. So you're also supposed to celebrate and have, because it's a happy holiday, you're supposed to have parties and do little plays like this. And then you're supposed to go out in the street. I'm going to try to find it. We're commanded to send out gifts of food or drink and make gifts to charity and eat the Haman Tashem and have celebrations. And you're supposed to get so drunk. Well, you know, there's not many holidays except for Mardi Gras where you're told to go out and get out in the street and get drunk. But this one, you're supposed to get so drunk that you can't tell the difference between somebody saying evil is Haman and blessed is Mordecai. So it's a really fun holiday. And we had a lot of fun with it when we were kids, dressing up as, of course, everybody wanted to be Esther. Or Mordecai and be the wise one. So that's the story of Purim, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it worked out, because it was kind of hard for me to do all this with the puppets and read the story. So next year maybe we'll be in the sanctuary and I can have a little help. Bye.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. This morning, following our time of silence together, I will be reading the traditional King James Version of the 23rd Psalm. I have found in my ministry over the years that in places where people come together for sacred observance, such as funerals and memorials, that no matter where they've been on their journey, many of them remember this version of this Hebrew prayer. So I invite you today, if you wish, to speak it aloud as you hear me say the words. Let us now consider the celebrations and the concerns of our congregation and observe some silence together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Shalom. Blessed be.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and by this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and by this we live.
Thank you for continuing to send in your pledge or other donations, either by mail or on our website, UUFEC.com. In March, our Share the Plate donations will be split with Healing Paws for Warriors. This group is committed to providing our heroes the tools to live as they struggle with PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and other debilitating conditions. Their goal is to increase veterans' self-esteem, allow them to lead a more productive life, and help alleviate some of their symptoms. By training rescue or shelter dogs, they allow the veteran to receive a service dog at no cost. They could potentially save 2 lives in the process, the veteran and the dog. Thank you for your generosity.
A Puritan is one who suspects that somewhere someone is having a good time. While hardly a scholarly observation, this quip from American journalist and satirist H.L. Mencken bolsters the myth that obscures the history of the Puritans as some of the most powerful social, political, and religious reformers of their time in the 17th century. Why should this matter to a bunch of 21st century Unitarian Universalists? Because the Puritans are our religious great-great-great-grandparents. And believe it or not, our penchant for rebellion against religious, social, and political constraint goes back to them in the American part of UU history. These are our theological ancestors, and to understand ourselves and the 6 sources of our living tradition, we need to peer back into history to gain better perspective from these, dare we say it, proto-Unitarians. How did we get from the dour, stalwart immigrants who landed at Plymouth Rock to being the happy heretics we are today? Foundational to their movement were these 2 pivotal concepts: that the individual can and must access the divine directly, without a mediating authority such as a priest, and that the Christian scriptures, which included much of the Jewish sacred texts, held the wisdom and guidance necessary to instruct the individual in living a good and faithful life. The path from Puritan to Unitarian was a long and laborious one, about which I would like to emphasize a few key points. The Pilgrims, yes, the original Mayflower Pilgrims, who landed at Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620, were the first of several migrations from England of separatist independence, who opposed the excesses of the Anglican Church. These separatists perceived that the Church of England had strayed from a pure understanding of biblical doctrine and had become dangerously entangled with the government, a practice going back even before King Henry VIII declared himself to be the head of the Church, but all the way back to the Roman Empire, which was converted to Christianity in one brilliant political move by Emperor Constantine in 312. So our theological ancestors left home and hearth to travel the seas to North America, in part over their conviction that church and state should operate separately. It is also significant that they came in family groups, with the intention of creating a model civilization based on biblical principles. Many of them were educated and brought a dedication to individual learning and knowledge to their religious societies. They created a kind of congregational polity, whereby the members of the church, held together by a covenant, wielded power in a somewhat democratic structure, though limited initially to white men of wealth and status. These congregations chose their own ministers, and these members led their congregations at the pleasure. These ministers led their congregations at the pleasure of the members, rather than being appointed and sent by a church hierarchy, such as in the Anglican system. Does any of this sound familiar? And so the Puritans evolved into the Congregationalist church. Later, during a time of societal and religious upheaval known as the Great Awakening in the first part of the 18th century, these Congregationalist churches found themselves struggling in conflict between individual emotional experience of revival conversions and communal intellectual assent to historical doctrinal positions and traditional practices. Factions began to split away, and those called Old Light Congregationalists, who believed that religious faith should be tempered by science and logic in the age of reason, were the forerunners of the Unitarians, who were known historically for their rejection of the divinity of Jesus and therefore of the orthodox doctrine of the Trinity. William Ellery Channing, in his famous Baltimore sermon delivered May 5, 1819, presented the name of Unitarian to the growing number of liberal Congregationalists, and in 1825 the American Unitarian Association was born. Universalism developed more subtly and broadly out of several splinter groups traceable back to the Puritans, including Baptists. These pushed back against the orthodox position that failure to accept God's forgiveness of sin and salvation through the sacrificial death of Jesus resulted in eternal damnation. Similar challenges to that position go back to the 3rd century, but in America, the rejection of an eternal hell bubbled up independently in several places as a reasonable theological extrapolation from the concept of God's compassionate grace as the overarching theme of the Christian Gospels. Simply put, if God loved all people so much that God provided the perfect sacrifice in the person of Jesus in order to save all humanity from their own sinfulness, why would God allow any of those precious children to suffer eternal damnation over their stubborn or ignorant refusal of the gift? The Universalist asked, would a loving deity send a person, any person, to a permanent hell? And answered, no. All people will be universally reconciled to God. Universalists began to break away and form their own societies, also congregational in polity, and more focused on biblical tradition as the foundation for charity and justice work as the mission of the larger church. These congregations organized into the Universalist Church of America in 1793. The Unitarians and Universalists grew alongside each other, sometimes in cooperation, for more than a century, before uniting in 1961 to become the Unitarian Universalist Association. As we consider our 4th source of the teachings from Christianity and Judaism, it is important to remember that both Unitarians and Universalists were exclusively Christian in identity and practice for generations. The Unitarians began to explore other ideas and traditions such as transcendentalism in the late 1800s and humanism, including agnostics and non-theists, and some Eastern religions in the early 20th century. As the 21st century approached, they continued to expand their theological embrace to include more non-Christian members such as neo-pagans and practitioners of indigenous religions. The Universalists held on longer and harder to biblical traditional Christianity within the context of welcoming all into God's loving embrace. So the underpinnings of both movements by the teachings found in the Jewish and Christian scriptures are an important part of understanding ourselves as modern Unitarian Universalists. I know that some UUs prefer not to give much consideration to our 4th source. I understand that some have suffered spiritual abuse at the hands of those calling themselves Christian. Some UUs have embraced other sources of wisdom and see little use for Jewish and Christian teachings. Personally, I find that many of these sacred texts still speak powerfully to me and promote spiritual guidance and moral values which enrich both my inner and outer lives. Some of the stories in these texts are full of fierce themes of rebellion and the fight for justice and freedom. Other stories are laced with compassion, forgiveness, and second chances. The imagery is vivid, the language intriguing. These narratives are full of inspiration, mystery, irony, humor, and truth. One of my favorite stories from the Hebrew Torah is found in the book of Genesis about the visit to the matriarch and patriarch of Judaism, Abraham and Sarah, by three mysterious figures who are, the narrator reveals, divine persons. When Abraham sees them approaching his tent in the heat of the day, he runs to make them welcome with water to wash. He tells his wife Sarah to bake bread and a servant to prepare meat, and he invites the strangers to refresh themselves. Among desert peoples, hospitality is more than social protocol. It is vital for survival. And Abraham and Sarah take this responsibility very seriously. One of the figures then tells Abraham that he will return in a year, by which time Sarah will have produced a son. The theme of barrenness and fertility is common in many ancient mythologies and sacred texts. Abraham and Sarah are old people in this story, and when Sarah overhears, because she is eavesdropping by the tent flap, she cannot help but laugh out loud. The strangers hear her laugh and confront her incredulity, which she denies, but to no avail. Later in the story, she does, in fact, give birth to their son, Isaac, which name means laughter. When I visited the doctor a while back for a check, the nurse asked me, as she asks all female patients, if I might be pregnant. Immediately I laughed out loud, and I thought of Sarah in that story. At 53, I told the nurse such an event would be a miracle of biblical proportions. This story speaks to me about an old couple receiving the news that they have wished for all their days together, and having trouble taking it in or figuring out what to do next. It makes me think of the old adage, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. Their story is a long and circuitous one. It is a foundational story for the Jewish people about their ancestral parents and how it all began. It is not a factual history, but a myth full of truths and insights about humanity, including both some of its best and worst traits. I value this story for its depiction of an interaction between human and divine in the familiar place of home, and in the hearts of an old woman and an old man, where they had buried their deepest longings. When considering the Christian texts which tell the tales about the life and teachings of a rebellious Jewish reformer, Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth, one of my favorite stories is what my husband Bill calls the miracle of the dropping rocks. This story is included in the Gospel according to John, which portrays Rabbi Jesus as a man of both intelligence and compassion. In the story, he is teaching at the temple, and the religious leaders who feel threatened by him come up with an idea to publicly embarrass him and give an excuse to have him removed. they drag a poor, unknown woman in front of him, supposedly yanked from her married lover's bed, but not the male lover, of course. And they challenge Rabbi Jesus with the ancient directive to stone a woman caught in adultery. Legends that by this time in his preaching career, Jesus had developed a reputation for his unorthodox treatment of women, and his words and actions that elevated them to a closer status with men. So this is a real problem for a rabbi to be challenged as to whether he favors upholding a clearly religious law or whether he will excuse and forgive this woman for her unlawful and sinful behavior. In fact, what he did was to inspire the miracle of the dropping rocks. He says just the right words to cause these angry men who are accusing both this poor woman and this radical rabbi to question themselves. Let he who is without sin among you cast the first stone. He pushes them to examine their own motivation, their own scheming, their own hearts, and as they do, ask themselves each inwardly, am I without sin? Am I qualified to throw a stone at this woman and injure her or kill her? One by one, the rocks slip from their sweaty fingers, and filled with shame and regret, each man stumbles away. Jesus keeps looking down the whole time, drawing in the sand until the last stone hits the dust. Then he focuses for the first time on this frightened, confused woman and invites her to consider her own situation thoughtfully. Woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you? No one, Lord, she answers. Then neither do I condemn you. Jesus declared, go and sin no more. What a rich story to mine for truths about compassion, legalism, patriarchy, sexuality, violence, cultural identity, institutional power, judgmentalism, and the list goes on. The beauty of these texts from the Hebrew and Christian sources is how they can make us see the world and ourselves differently, and motivate us to grow and become better versions of ourselves. No doubt our Puritan ancestors interpreted such scriptures more narrowly and with a specific agenda as the lens through which to understand them. But remember that they were ones who believed so much that the spiritual life is an individual one lived within the community. They fought, died, immigrated to a wilderness beyond the sea for the principle that humans could access the divine directly, without the need for an intermediary to control that interaction. Their descendants and the religious movements which grew out of and broke away from them went on to apply such principles to governmental and economic systems. The Puritans, who became Congregationalists, who became Unitarians, and the Universalists, who grew out of similar movements, made the way for us, the 21st century UUs. That strong, independent, heretical spirit belongs to us. And it was inspired by the stories found in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. We may not want to read them every day, but let's at least occasionally blow the dust off those sources and rediscover the wisdom, the power, the inspiration within. Finally, remember that Rabbi Jesus taught that the entirety of Jewish law and tradition could be summed up in this commandment, that we love God with all that we have and all that we are, and that we love our neighbors as ourselves. If everyone followed this to the best of their ability and within the parameters of their own belief systems, we would not have to fight for justice anymore, nor pray for peace. Justice would roll down like waters, as the ancient Hebrew prophet Amos declared, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. May it be so. Amen. Shalom. Blessed be. Dear Mother, Father of us all, forgive our foolish ways. Reclothe us in our rightful mind, in purer lives thy service find, in deeper reverence praise, in simple trust like theirs who heard beside the Syrian sea the gracious calling of the word. Let us, like them, our faith restored, rise up and follow thee. O Sabbath rest like Galilee, O calm of hills above, where Jesus knelt to share with thee the silence of eternity, interpreted by love.
When all is quiet and we are small and the night is dark, may we hear the tender breathing of all who lie awake with us in fear, that together we may gather strength to live with love and kindness and confidence.
Siblings and kindred, there is always so much more to learn. Our source of Jewish and Christian tradition, which takes us all the way back to our ancestors, the Pilgrims, still has much to say to us. May justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Amen. Shalom. Blessed be.